Welcome to the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Join us each week as we sit down with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management and author of Your Fiscal Physical, Ryan Nelson. Tune in to gain valuable insights and practical tips as we simplify complex financial concepts into digestible lessons. From budgeting to retirement planning, this podcast is your go-to resource for mastering financial literacy.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. I am Aaron Hoisington. I am here with Ryan Nelson, founder of Alchemy Wealth Management, a booming financial service company. What is it actually called?
Wealth management?
Wealth management. That's what the words I was looking for there. At this point, by the time you're listening to this, it'll be global. I can only imagine at that point. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pennies will be invested in that company, to say the least. But Ryan, appreciate you being here, my man. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty solid, man. And today we are going to give the listeners a topic here. We're going to talk about retirement needs analysis. As a financial advisor, Ryan, I'm sure you get quite a few questions like, trying to meet financial goals. Like, I think that's one of the things that I've learned with, being friends and being a client of yours is like, cool. Like, it's not just about planning for retirement. There's different goals you kind of want to achieve with your finances. But one of them is, a big one is retirement. Yeah. I would say I don't know if it's the biggest one that you probably go with. I would guess. Oh, yeah. Right up there. So I'm curious here, like, how to perform a retirement needs assessment analysis. Like, can you kind of break down like what goes into the process overall, which we've probably covered on previous episodes, but I think it's always good to kind of bring everything back into like, what you're trying to do there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, retirement goal is I think, as far as I can think of, probably every client I've had's number one financial goal, right? It's the thing, it's certainly the biggest dollar goal most of us will ever have. And so, there's what we call a retirement needs analysis, and that would be kind of the process to determine how much money we need to retire, right? And so I always like to say, well, we can just jump into it. It's what we use here is a 5-step process. It's really like 4 steps and a bonus step. So let's just dive right in. So first, what you want to think about is, what are your retirement goals?
Sure.
Which sounds so simple, right? Most people probably just hear that and say, yeah, of course. But then, like, if they were sitting with me across from my desk and I asked them that question, they know it's important, but most people have never actually thought of it. And it's such a big difference, right? Like, the difference between needing $200,000 a year, $100,000 a year, or $50,000 a year, that's astronomical, yes, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the difference between $50,000 a year and $200,000 a year is a 4x difference every single year for the rest of your life. The process of us getting you to that goal is going to be drastically different. You're going to be in different tax brackets. So that means the money, where we'd be putting your accounts, where we'd be putting the dollars, what type of accounts we'd be using proactively would be different. So if I have a client that comes in and says, I want to spend $50,000 a year, we may use a different type of retirement account than the client that comes in just an hour later that says, we want $200,000 a year in retirement, right? And so it's very, very important to know on the front end what our retirement goals are. And so I'll use myself as an example. I think most people will say, oh, I'm going to spend less in retirement. I'm not going to have kids. I'm not going to have a mortgage. I'm going to spend less in retirement. And again, if I use myself as an example, I would say, I don't know exactly what my retirement is going to look like. And I would never want a client to like outline exactly what something is.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yep. You just don't know. But you can start to get ideas. And so the reason why I like at least the idea of retirement is I picture it sort of like my weekends, just freedom of time and money, right? And so on my weekends, I can go travel. I can go out of the state. I can go to a football game. I can go to a movie. I can go bowling, right? I can do whatever I want. And I just kind of picture my retirement being like 7 days of that.
Right? Sounds magical.
Yeah, absolutely. And but if I look at my spending habits, I spend a lot more money Friday, Saturday, Sunday than I do Monday through Thursday. So when I retire, I don't want to just still have flexibility only be able to afford to have flexibility on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I want to, again, be able to afford. Now I'll have the time, but I also want to have the financial resources to be able to do whatever I want Sunday through Sunday.
Right. Yeah,
all week.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I know for myself personally, I'll probably be spending a lot more money in retirement than I am now. All the time I'm spending working on the business, I will now not be spending doing that, and I'll be doing
whatever you want,
spending money.
Spending money.
So probably the most important goal, or the most important step of all of this is step one: figuring out what your retirement goal is and putting some time and thought into that. So again, for me, I think it can be as simple as saying, I want my retirement to look like what my weekends look like now. And as I put some time, I put some thought into that. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to have freedom of time and finances to do what I want when I want. Okay, perfect. So now we'd move into step number 2. How much will that lifestyle cost every year? So I kind of started touching on this in step 1, but so I said I want that freedom and time of 7 days a week, so I know it's going to cost more. I can start looking at, okay, how much money do I spend Friday through Sunday, and say, okay, well, if I'm going to have 7 days of freedom instead, right?
Days,
I can start kind of coming up with, okay, what is the exact dollar amount that will cost? This is certainly not the number that's actual reality for me, but let's just use it. Let's say that I end up determining that number is $100,000. So we say, okay, my goal, I figure out sort of roughly what that goal costs. I'm just using today's dollars, so I'm not worrying about inflation or anything like that. And I just look at today's dollars. I say, okay, I need $100,000. Perfect. That's step 2. So step 1 is figuring out sort of high level what the goal is. Step 2 is figuring out what the cost of that goal would be. Step 3 would be determining how much, what do you need for that nest egg to be able to, in this example, spend $100,000 a year for the rest of your life. And so we had a previous episode on the 4% rule. Yep. This is certainly, the reality is if we were doing this retirement needs analysis with clients, we would use very advanced technology solutions to go way more in depth on all of this, right?
Sure.
But for the purposes of a quick podcast and getting a rough idea and a rule of thumb, something like using the 4% rule would be an adequate tool to use to start get a rough idea of how much money you would need. And as a reminder, the 4% rule, you can go back and reference that episode if needed, but as a rough reminder, the 4% rule means when you reach retirement, you could spend approximately 4% of your nest egg each year, right? A lot more detail than that, but for purposes of this, we can go with that. So what that means is if I'm now kind of reverse engineering this and I say, okay, I want $100,000 a year. What nest egg do I need for 4% of that nest egg to be 100,000, right?
Yeah.
Not getting into the math, a quick the inverse of 4% is 25. So what you can do is just take the $100,000, multiply it by 25. So if I take $100,000, multiply it by 25, that's 2.5 million, I believe. And so if I had a nest egg of 2.5 million, 4% of that every year would be $100,000 a year. So now I could start to say, okay, maybe a nest egg of 2.5 million. I'm ignoring a lot of things like Social Security, right? Again, this is not an in-depth needs analysis, but this is giving you a really rough idea of, okay, how much do I think I would need? And so for this example, I would say, okay, I think I need about $2.5 million. Now you want to start to figure out, how are you actually? So the 4% rule is a great rule of thumb, and that can help give you that idea of how much, what that ultimate nest egg is going to be. But when it actually comes time to spend that money, you're going to want to go a lot deeper than just the 4% rule. And so you want to determine what your withdrawal strategy is going to be.
Right, absolutely.
So you could use the 4% rule. I would tell you that's probably, it's a tool. It's if you're managing all your finances on your own and it's the best tool you have access to, cool. I like it. It's better than not using it.
Nothing. Yeah,
better than just spending your money with no guidance, right? Now there's other things, what we call dynamic withdrawal strategies. We at my firm, we would use what are called guardrails. That's a specific type of dynamic withdrawal strategy. And it would allow you to not just take a flat, say 4% every year. There'd be some years where we take a lot more than 4%, some years where we take less than 4%. It would depend on where we're at through our journey. And depending on how we're taking Social Security and stuff, a lot of details go into that. But really, you'd want to kind of hone in on exactly how you're going to start taking those assets. And again, I think there's some options out there better than 4% rule. But for this example, let's just say that we keep running with 4%. So we'd say, okay, 4% is the rule we're going to use. And then what we'd want to do is just make sure we're constantly reviewing this plan, right? So that's really how we'd come up with how much money we need, or so our retirement needs analysis. But then what we'd also want to be doing is each year reviewing this. Right. I think a year, you could do it at any cadence you want. I think an annual cadence is a pretty healthy cadence. But so if you're not yet in retirement, you're doing this each year, and maybe you start figuring out, I need to spend a little more than 100,000, or maybe, I actually 100,000 was overkill. What was I thinking last year? I don't need that much, right? Or maybe you decide your income how you're going to take your money changes or whatever, right? But it's something you'd want to be iterating over time and constantly sort of revisiting this and looking at it. And then even once you transition into retirement, you'd sort of be doing the same thing. You'd now be spending your assets, and instead of trying to figure out how much you ultimately need, you'd sort of be looking at, you're effectively still doing the same thing. You're looking at how much you still need to remain to be able to spend that money for the rest of your life, and then comparing it to where you're at currently. And if as long as you still have more assets than what your retirement needs analysis says, then you're in good shape. But so high level, that's how you'd start to kind of figure out quickly and back of the napkin math how much money you might need for retirement needs analysis.
And you do, when a client comes in and you get, these are kind of the 5 steps that you take with them. Are these like some that you all are just like, cool, like, let's start with these? And
yeah, to some degree. Certainly I don't ever sort of most of my clients have probably never heard me say retirement needs analysis or heard me say like, hey, this is step 1, this is step 2. We do take them through a process. They don't even necessarily know what's step 1, what's step 2, where they're at in the process, right? But largely we're following these same steps. That being said, this I would say is a very oversimplified example of what a retirement needs analysis would be.
Right.
So with our, I wouldn't even call it 5 steps. With our, like internally, like behind the scenes, our process is a lot more robust, I guess, for lack of a better term. But for somebody who's trying to do this stuff on their own, this would be an oversimplified example for somebody to start wrapping their brain around, start to at least understand what a retirement needs analysis is, could maybe perform one quickly within 15 minutes after listening to this episode, and then start diving into it using Google and diving in deeper and deeper and deeper. So yeah, I would say like Alchemy Wealth Management's process isn't really identical to this, but this is a good sort of entry level process to dip somebody's toes in.
Yep. And I know that, like, myself being a client of yours and like just in general, I think the one that really stands out to me here that is the review, the plan, because things change all the time, just in life. I mean, monthly, weekly sometimes. So like just kind of reassessing where you're at. Oh, shoot, like my uncle died and he left me a lot of money. Like, where does that now my needs maybe have changed, or my goals might have changed. I might move up a couple of years. You know what? Shoot, we have to replace our roof on our house. Like, okay, we can't really contribute to the retirement this year, whatever it might be. And I think that piece of it is one of the biggest things that I've seen is just that it's a crucial step. However you're doing this assessment or analysis is just revisiting, because you're never the same in the well, not normally in the same financial situation year over year for the most part. If you are, awesome, like that's great if you're happy with where that's at. But I think things change, goals change, needs change, families change, people change, and so I think that revisiting that yearly, sure, that sounds great, but I think is a huge piece that I really want to hammer home with the listeners, that like you're a different person than you were probably 5 years ago, a year ago, whatever it might be.
It really is the journey, not the destination. Right? And it's overkill, but there really is. You can't just do a financial plan then be good.
Yes.
It really is the process of planning is what's valuable. So any financial plan, I believe financial plans are worthless. The process of going through a financial plan is very valuable. So it's exactly right. That iterative process of constantly doing it, and you really shouldn't think of it as a one-time thing you do throughout your life. It's your entire retirement journey is a retirement plan. You're constantly planning.
Yep. I think that's a better way to kind of to wrap your brain around what you're looking to accomplish with it, if you will, too. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Appreciate you breaking that down for us here. We're going to go ahead and take a quick pause and be back on the other side of this.
And now, to put the personal in personal finance.
Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the personal section of this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. I'm here in Reno. Ryan's here in Reno. I've lived here for 11 years. Ryan, you've been here, 30 plus, I'd say, if you will. So you've experienced all the different seasons that Reno has to offer. One of the reasons I actually really fell in love with Reno was all 4 seasons that we get. You don't really get that a lot of places. Like you get a solid summer, winter, or summer, fall, winter, spring. Everything is kind of defined by that time frame. And sometimes you get winter and it just comes back later, whatever. But I think that you get all 4 seasons here. So my question to you today is, what would you say your favorite season is here in the Reno area?
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Definitely the activities I do: run, bike, swim, things outdoors, hike, camp. I mean, those I can do it's easier or it's more comfortable to do in the summer usually, right? But oftentimes it's too hot too, right? But so maybe the summer. The reality is though, I think I do like all the seasons sort of equally. And like you said, I mean, there's, sometimes, you'll go visit like San Diego and you're like, God, wouldn't it be nice for it to just be like 75 degrees like every single day of your life? Like that's how do you beat that, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But the reality is like, by the end of each season, so by the end of summer, I'm getting ready. Like I'm ready to see some snow, and I'm ready to like wear a jacket and
Absolutely.
ready to walk my dog in the snow. And then by the end of winter, I'm like, God, I'm sick of it being so cold. I'm ready for right. And so I think the reality is I like you and do enjoy all 4 seasons. And by the end of each season, I'm ready for the next season. So I think I probably like all of them equally. I do sometimes get nostalgic about like a San Diego type place, but the reality is I think I probably would enjoy living in experiencing all 4 seasons more.
Yeah, I'm right there with you with that for sure. I was actually, it's funny you bring up that reference of San Diego. I was just taking a walk with my wife the other day and we were talking about like, oh man, like wouldn't it be nice to like have it be like 75 and sunny every day? And I'm like, well, yeah, but like I like going up to Tahoe when it's 100 degrees. Like it, it's just that piece of like I'd like floating the river when it's 95 out. So I like that variation that we get with temperature because it just feels almost like perfect. Like when I'm like, all right, well, I'm done using all my air conditioning. Let's get into a season where I can just kind of, just mellow out for a bit.
Right.
And what do you know? Fall's here.
Yeah.
And so then you just kind of coast into each of the seasons. I still think I could do without winter. Like I really don't enjoy that at all. Not a big winter sports guy. Like it's just inconvenient in general. So if we could cut that one out, I'd be cool with that. So, but any of the other 3, I like spring, I like summer, I like fall here.
As long as spring and fall are a little warm and
around 75 and sunny.
Yeah.
Every day, if you will. So
one thing I do think would be interesting. I haven't ever lived in San Diego for an extended period of time or anything, but the seasons do like make this like objective like passage of time. Like it's like it's like there's another winter, another summer. Like it's like, did I go to Tahoe this summer? Like time is somehow measured in these seasons, right? I'd be curious if I lived somewhere that was like a San Diego, like it almost. I'd be curious how time feels like over the course of years. Like 3 years goes by, and it's like, was there anything like substantially different separating those 3 years? Like you could do any of the things you could do in any of those 3 years. So it's always fascinating to me. But here, I feel like maybe that's true of everywhere. I just am ignorant to it. But here, I feel like it's definitely this like this marker of time that like you can't avoid or forget. Or
like you mentioned, I think that some of my biggest, I don't know, don't want to call them fondest, but like most pertinent memories that I think about in my head are like based around seasons or events that happen. Like a couple of years ago, we had a wicked winter, and it just what it was. We lost power for like 3 days in my house, and I'm just like, holy cow, we had so much snow. Like I just keep thinking, I always think about that, or it's like, wow, we had that stretch in the summer of like, a 2 weeks where it was over 100 every single day. Like we equate those things versus like if you lived in a place that would just had that same climate the whole time, like would you really like, oh, okay, cool, that weather, one less thing I have to worry about kind of thing, maybe. Like I don't know.
I don't know either.
But it's a funny conversation to kind of think about. But cool. Well, appreciate it, Ryan, as always. Appreciate you. Appreciate the listeners for checking us out here on the podcast. Please, if you guys have feedback, anything you want to hear us talk about, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. We'd love to hear it, or just text Ryan and I. We'd love to get some listener questions on here for sure. And Ryan, any last words?
As always, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us for the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Until next time, happy listening. And as always, stay the course. If you have a question or topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, subscribe to the podcast to ensure you never miss an episode. And consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite platform. This helps other listeners like you find the show. For more resources, you can visit Alchemy Wealth Management's website at www.alchemywealth.com or find your Fiscal Physical, the book, on Amazon. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that personal finance is just that, personal. Please don't take anything we say as advice. The preceding content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not an offer or a solicitation, nor should it be construed or relied upon for tax, legal, or investment advice. It doesn't consider your personal financial situation or objectives and may not be suitable for you.